Hello, respected viewers. Welcome back to my English Law channel. So I'm going further with theft in criminal law. So the Theft Act 1968 sets out a number of offences which are connected to theft, such as robbery under Section 8, blackmail under Section 21, burglary under Section 9, and aggravated burglary under Section 10. So coming back to the Theft Act, if you look at Section 8.1, it says a person is guilty of robbery if he steals and immediately before or at the time of doing so, and in order to do so, he uses force on a person or seeks to put any person in fear of being then and there subjected to force. It goes on. A person guilty of robbery shall, on conviction, on indictment, be liable to imprisonment for life. Close quotation. So astonishing. Not many people would realise that robbery is punishable by life imprisonment. Having said that, I've never heard of anyone in the United Kingdom getting life imprisonment. Even the great train robbers only got 35 years. So robbery is different from theft insofar as ordinary theft, insofar as robbery involves actual violence or the threat of it, threatening with a gun, threatening with a knife, or even threatening to punch someone. You don't have to have a weapon. So robbery. And the actus reus here is the same as for theft, but is also using threatening force or actual force at or before the time of the theft. The mens rea is the same for theft. So you're intending to use strength in order to steal, okay? So you're going to hit someone, kick someone, stab someone, shoot someone, or at least threaten to do so. So break it down. Robbery involves theft. It involves using or threatening force against a person, and it has to happen at the time of stealing or very shortly beforehand. And the use of force or the threat thereof has to be connected to the stealing. So the actus reus is the same as it is for theft. Remember, appropriation of the property belonging to another person dishonestly, with the intention of depriving the person for it permanently, that comes under the mens rea. So you find it in R against Robinson and R against Mitchell. So force, the defendant is using force against a person or frightens a person into thinking that he is going to suffer violent force at that time. Okay, so R against DPP is a case about it, R against Taylor. They're more on force, R against Dawson and James, R against Cluden, P and others against DPP. So DPP can be Department of Public Prosecutions or indeed Director of Public Prosecutions. So what exactly is this immediately before or at the time of the robbery? Because it can't be a long time before. Well, R against Hale grappled with that, as it did R against Donaghy and Marshall. Remember, the force has to be used in order to steal. The force can't be unconnected to the theft, as was provided for in R against Hale and R against Donaghy and Marshall. So I've got this incredibly itchy snout at the moment. So blackmail. So the Theft Act sets that out in Section 21. A person is guilty of blackmail if he, with a view to gain for himself or another, or intent to cause loss to another, makes an unwarranted demand with menaces. So there's close quotation. So as in some sort of threat. It's not a reasonable demand, it's not a demand that you're allowed to make. So you have to be trying to get something for yourself or else cause some detriment to another person. So the actus reus here is making a demand and with menace. The mens rea is demanding with menaces, and that's unwarranted. Further, the demand is made either trying to gain something for oneself or to occasion a loss for another person. So the demand, it can be said outright or it can be implicit. That was proved in R against Collister and Warhurst. In Treacy and DPP, it was made when a threatening letter was sent. So the menaces, well, the word menace, this was in R against Lawrence and Pomeroy, was found the word menace is in an ordinary English word, which in most cases needs no elaboration. Close quotation. It's like the French word menacer, to threaten. So again, it can be implicit. So what is this? Well, it was found in Thorn against Motor Trade Association that the threat is any action detrimental to unpleasant to the person addressed. Okay, unpleasant or detrimental. Okay, it could be I'm going to reveal some embarrassing information, spread a false rumour, or whatever, spit on you. So and it was a case about it called R and Clear, in which the bench found a threat of such a nature and extent that the mind of an ordinary person of normal stability and courage might be influenced so as to cede unwillingly to a clear demand. Close quotation. So that's what it is there. It can't be something very trifling. That wouldn't be sufficient. So there's an objective test which was set out in R against Clear. What would a reasonable person with an ordinary level of bravery do in this case? It's immaterial if the victim is not influenced in the same way that an ordinary person would be, the reasonable man would be. Now, it could be menaces, even if the reasonable man wouldn't have been swayed. But in the case of the defendant, you must take into account various factors about the victim, which might make the victim particularly susceptible to the threat, and the defendant might be cognizant of those weaknesses of the victim, and therefore use these weak spots. You might find it's Achilles' heel. That was found in R against Garwood. So it doesn't matter if the threat can be carried out or not, as per section 221.2. R and Lambert was a case where they found that. So remember, it must be an unwarranted threat. It's in section 21.1a and b. The demand, accompanied by menaces, will be unwarranted unless the defendant believes that he has a good reason for making this demand, or the use of menaces is the right way to enforce this demand. So a debt collection agency asking you to pay your debts, otherwise you'll go to court, that's warranted, and that is a reasonable way of trying to enforce payment. So unwarranted, well, it's up to the prosecution to prove that it was unwarranted, but they only need to disprove one of these things. We have to base it on what the defendant believed. The Criminal Law Revision Committee looked into this and tried to say, well, it's got to be something which is socially and morally acceptable. If the menace is about a crime, the jury would not believe that the defendant thinks that this is something which is acceptable. That was found in R against Harvey and Ulliott and Plummer. So remember, this has got to be done with the objective of obtaining some advantage for oneself, or indeed causing some disadvantage to another party. So remember, it's with a view to gain for himself or another, with an end to cause loss to another. So the gain or loss is set out in section 34.2a. So it could be pecuniary or into some other property. The gain doesn't have to really be a gain. It could be maintaining what one already owns, and that's provided for in section 34.2a1. So the loss could include someone not gaining what he is supposed to gain. That's set out by that very same section. Okay, so that's just a little bit about robbery and blackmail. Toodaloo.